This is the story of how Buick, the company that built cars for doctors and lawyers, secretly developed the most powerful muscle car of 1970 and then watched the whole program disappear before anyone knew it existed. More than 500 horsepower came out of the Stage 2, and it ran 10-second quarter miles when the famous Hemi and LS6 Chevelle couldn't keep up. But here's the thing most people don't realize. Only 2 factory Stage 2 cars ever rolled off the line, and that number isn't a typo. Drag racers called this the baddest Buick Detroit ever let loose, and by the end of this video you'll understand exactly why almost nobody has heard of it. What happened to this car might be the greatest missed opportunity in muscle car history. Understanding why the Stage 2 matters requires looking at what was happening inside General Motors during 1970. For years, a corporate rule had prevented any intermediate car from receiving an engine larger than 400 cubic inches, a policy designed to keep things under control. That ban disappeared in 1970, and suddenly all 4 GM divisions started racing to install their biggest and most powerful engines in mid-size platforms. Chevrolet brought the Chevelle SS with the LS6 454, Pontiac fielded the GTO Judge, and Oldsmobile offered the 442. Buick occupied a different space entirely, because this wasn't a performance brand by any stretch. Comfortable and quiet cars for professionals defined the Buick image, and when people pictured the brand, they thought of grandfather's Electra rather than a drag strip monster. Something was brewing inside Buick's engineering department that would shock the entire automotive world within months. January of 1970 brought Motor Trend magazine a Buick GS 455 equipped with the Stage 1 package, and what happened next became the stuff of legend. That car crossed the quarter mile in 13.38 seconds at 105.5 miles per hour, with 0 to 60 taking just 5.5 seconds. Motor Trend didn't hold back on their verdict and declared this Buick the quickest American production muscle car of 1970. Putting those numbers in perspective tells the real story. The 1970 Chevelle SS, with the legendary LS6 454, ran 13.44 seconds, while the Plymouth 426 Hemi managed around 13.5 seconds, and the Pontiac GTO Judge posted approximately 14.2 seconds. Every single one of them lost to the Buick, and the gap wasn't even close. Here's where things get interesting, because the Stage 1 carried an official rating of just 360 horsepower, while the LS6 Chevelle claimed 450. On paper, the Chevelle should have destroyed the Buick. What made the Buick 455 different from any other big block in GM's lineup came down to independent development, because each GM division engineered their own engines completely separately. Pontiac's 455, Oldsmobile's 455, and Buick's 455 shared absolutely nothing in terms of design, engineering philosophy, or performance goals. Buick's version displaced exactly 455 cubic inches from a 4.312 bore and 3.90-inch stroke. The real innovation showed up in the construction, where thin wall castings shaved approximately 150 pounds compared to the Chevrolet 454 or Chrysler 426 Hemi. That weight savings on the front end of a car affects handling, traction, and acceleration in ways that show up immediately at the drag strip. Weight wasn't the only advantage Buick's engineering team held. Denny Manor led the development effort and later explained the philosophy by saying, quote, "Fast for the street, that was our goal. Buicks were heavy and loaded with power everything. Low-end torque was key, because that's how people perceive performance," end quote. That goal translated into 510 pound-feet of torque from the Stage 1, peaking at just 2,800 RPM for the highest torque rating of any muscle car in the classic era. Stepping on the gas in a Stage 1 Buick meant launching like nothing else on the road. Those horsepower numbers tell a story that gets really interesting when you dig into the factory records. Buick officially rated the Stage 1 at 360 horsepower, but production line engine testing revealed something different. 15 Stage 1 engines went through dyno testing, and the lowest of those 15 produced 376 horsepower, which meant 16 more than advertised. Some of those engines pushed past 385 horsepower when shifted at optimal RPM rather than economy shift points. Deliberately underrating their own engine came down to insurance calculations. A 10-to-1 power-to-weight ratio triggered surcharges from insurance companies in 1970, and crossing that threshold meant significantly higher premiums for buyers. Buick listed the GS 455 with a curb weight of 3,600 pounds, and at exactly 360 horsepower, the car sat precisely at that threshold. A Buick document later spelled out the strategy by explaining, quote, "To allow the Skylark Grand Sport the best opportunity for factoring in competition, we rated the Stage 1 at 360 HP at 5,000 RPM," end quote. Gaming the system worked perfectly. Using trap speed formulas on Motor Trend's 105.5 mile/hour result, experts calculate actual as installed output between 390 and 425 horsepower, a massive difference from what the window sticker claimed. Already holding the title of fastest production muscle car in America, Buick's engineers wanted more. Development of the Stage 2 started in 1969, and this wasn't a tweaked Stage 1 with a few upgraded parts. The transformation turned the engine into a complete racing package. Starting with the exhaust ports shows the difference immediately, because the Stage 1 used rectangular D-shape ports, while the Stage 2 introduced revolutionary round exhaust ports. That change required completely new cylinder head castings, with part number 1, 2, 3, 5, 7, 1, 4, and 57 cubic centimeter combustion chambers. Compression ratios jumped from the Stage 1's 10-to-1 or 10.5-to-1 up to 11-to-1 for street applications and 12-to-1 for racing. The intake system changed completely as well, swapping the Stage 1's Rochester Quadrajet on an iron manifold for an Edelbrock B4B aluminum intake topped with a Holley 850 CFM carburetor carrying part number R4781. The biggest transformation came from the camshaft. Stage 1's hydraulic cam ran streetable profiles with a rev limit around 5,500 RPM. But the Stage 2 camshaft carrying part number 1385557 earned a description from Buick engineers as, quote, "a wild grind designed to run without mufflers," end quote. Those specs told the whole story, with valve lift of 0.455 inches on the intake and 0.480 on the exhaust, duration of 340 degrees intake and 360 degrees exhaust, and 160 degrees of overlap. An engine with that cam would barely idle. The valve train could safely spin to 7,000 RPM, and power output jumped to an estimated 500 to 540 horsepower. Adding approximately $3,100 to the base GS price brought total window stickers to roughly $7,227, which works out to nearly $60,000 adjusted for inflation. Every great muscle car has engineers who pushed boundaries behind the scenes. And for the Stage 2, that man was Dennis Manor, known to everyone as Denny. Serving as Buick's engine development engineer, Manor led the entire 455, Stage 1, and Stage 2 development program. Racing always finds the weak point was something he understood better than most corporate executives. Manor personally sent experimental parts to selected racers and attended GS Nationals events for decades, telling Hagerty Media in 2021, quote, "50 years ago, I never would have believed that this would all continue. I never could have imagined it," end quote. Manor didn't work alone on this project. Clifford G. Studeker served as assistant chief engineer and later executive engineer for all Buick engines while overseeing the entire 400, 430, and 455 development. Studeker even authored an SAE technical paper documenting the engine's design. Larry Lyons started at Buick in 1965 as a co-op student through the General Motors Institute and worked alongside Manor before rising to become chief engineer at Oldsmobile. Lyons offered perspective on GM's internal culture by explaining, quote, "Friendly competition in those days is what made GM great. Within the Sloan pecking order, the Stage 1 Buick was the fastest street car out there, and that made plenty of people nervous," end quote. That nervousness came from executives at Chevrolet and Pontiac, who watched the Stage 1 dominate. The Stage 2 represented the weapon Buick was building to stay ahead. Here's where the Stage 2 story takes a turn that seems almost unbelievable. Only 2 factory-assembled Stage 2 test cars ever existed. Just 2, and both went to carefully selected racing teams to prove the package in competition. A red 4-speed GS became the first car, the same one Motor Trend had tested that January. After the magazine returned it, Buick shipped it to Doug Jones and Dave Benecek, who successfully campaigned the car in NHRA and HRA Superstock events throughout the 1970s. Their consistency proved stunning, with regular runs of 10.7 seconds at 123 miles per hour in the quarter mile. Exposure for that red Buick included advertisements for Pennzoil, Kragar Wheels, M&H Racemasters, and Stuart Warner, plus a feature in NHRA's official history of the World Finals. Dave Benecek's story extends even further into the record books. In 1972, he drove a Buick GS called Big Red that Buick built as a factory corporate office order specifically for competition, and that year, Benecek went undefeated. Not a single loss for the entire 1972 season earned him 5 World Championships, Division 7 honors, and the national ET record. National Dragster called him, quote, Mr. Stock Eliminator, a man that has never lost a race this year, end quote. A Buick driver dominated Stock Eliminator so completely that he never lost a race for an entire season, and almost nobody today knows his name. A white GSX became the second factory Stage 2 car, and it went to a California team that would become legendary in Buick performance circles. Pappy Kennedy and Jim Bell operated out of Reynolds Buick in California, and Bell had founded Kenny Bell Performance in 1968 because he understood what the Buick platform could deliver. Receiving the white GSX prototype turned their operation into a rolling test laboratory from 1970 through 1973 as they converted it to what they called full Stage 2 10-second quarter-mile spec. Documentation followed that car throughout its entire racing career. Decades later, the restored GSX appeared at the highest levels of show competition, winning gold at the 2016 Muscle Car and Corvette Nationals with 985 out of 1,000 points. That white prototype remains one of the most thoroughly documented and verified Stage 2 cars in existence. While Jones, Benecek, and Kenny Bell proved the Stage 2 in stock and superstock classes, another racer pushed the platform to its absolute limits in pro stock. Tony Branson ran a 1969 GS drag car sponsored by Bill Price Buick in Burlington, North Carolina. But what made his car special came from direct support provided by Denny Manor himself. Experimental components that never made it to production arrived at Branson's shop, including tunnel port Stage 2 engine parts, representing an even more radical evolution of the already extreme Stage 2 design. 9.17 seconds at 153 miles per hour. That was the fastest documented Stage 2 powered run in history from Branson's car. Most muscle cars in that era struggled to break into the 13-second range, and a Buick was running 9s in full pro stock territory, competing with the best teams from Chrysler and Ford. Branson switched to Chrysler factory support in 1971, and what records might have fallen with continued Buick backing remains unknown. Magazine coverage from this era reveals exactly how the automotive press viewed the GS. Hot Rod magazine previewed the 1970 GS in their November 1969 issue with an article titled Mr. Muscle of 1970. That wasn't a subtitle or a secondary headline, but the actual title, crowning Buick the king of muscle before the model year even started. Cars magazine called the Stage 1 GS 400, quote, the adult supercar, end quote, in July of 1969. That phrase captured something about Buick's approach, because this car could destroy anything on the drag strip while wrapped in luxury appointments and comfortable ride quality. Special Interest Autos published a retrospective years later titled 1970 Buick GSX Stage 1, the Velvet Hammer. That nickname stuck with Buick and enthusiasts around the world, adopting it to describe the car's unique combination of raw power and refined luxury. A 1984 shootout published in Muscle Car Review provided the most telling story. Richard Lasseter brought his 1970 Buick GS Stage 1, while Roy Beatty brought his 1970 Plymouth GTX Hemi, and before the race, Beatty wrote dismissively that, quote, the GS Buicks run like they're tied to a tree, end quote. Then they ran. The Buick posted 12.30 at 110.97 miles per hour, while the Hemi managed 13.03. Beatty had to eat his words, and conceded, quote, the advice I give my teenage son is no matter how good you are at something, someone else will come along and beat you, end quote. Contemporary and modern racers echo similar feelings, with one veteran putting it simply by saying, quote, you didn't often run against a Buick, But when you did, you lost. Game over. End. Quote. The question that haunts this entire story comes down to how the fastest muscle car of 1970 became almost unknown. Brand perception created the first obstacle. Buick wasn't a performance brand in anyone's mind, because when people thought Pontiac, they thought GTO. When they thought Chevrolet, they pictured the Chevelle SS or Camaro. And when they thought Buick, they saw comfortable sedans for older professionals. One historian described it as a wolf in luxury clothing, where the performance was real, but the image didn't match. Marketing failures made everything worse. GSX production ran from March through May of 1970, approximately 2.5 months in just 2 colors. Saturn Yellow accounted for 491 units, while Apollo White added 187 more, for a total GSX production of just 678 units. Here's the part that defies belief. The GSX didn't even appear in Buick's standard 1970 catalog, and the only promotional material consisted of a 4-page pamphlet with no national advertising campaign behind it. One historian noted that, quote, all units were moved by people randomly walking into a dealer showroom, end quote. Buick built the fastest car in America and then forgot to tell anyone about it. By 1972, the situation got even worse when Buick's brochure that year omitted the GS entirely, effectively abandoning the car. Regular production never happened for the Stage 2 program, and the reasons reveal the broader forces that killed the muscle car era. Stage 2 cylinder heads carrying casting number 1235714 first appeared as a valid part number on November 1st of 1970. Dealers could order them at a cost of $51.97 per head. By April of 1971, that price climbed to $139.41 per head. March of 1972 brought discontinuation and program cancellation. 2 factors killed it. Casting difficulties with those revolutionary round port cylinder heads pushed manufacturing capabilities to their limits, and consistent quality proved difficult to achieve. Emissions regulations created the bigger problem, with Denny Manor calling it, quote, the full weight coming crashing down, end quote. Federal clean air standards would soon require catalytic converters, unleaded fuel, and dramatically lower compression ratios. No future existed for a 12-to-1 compression ratio racing engine in that environment, and the Stage 2 died not from competition, but from regulation. Approximately 75 to 100 sets of Stage 2 heads left the factory before the program ended. That's the entire production run. The full picture of how rare these cars actually were starts with the 1970 numbers. Buick produced 2,465 GS 455 Stage 1 hardtops that year, along with 232 Stage 1 convertibles. GSX production broke down to 400 equipped with Stage 1, while 278 received the base 455. That ratio tells you something, because more buyers chose the more powerful and more expensive Stage 1 option than the base engine. These were serious performance buyers who understood exactly what they were getting. 1971 brought Stage 1 hardtop production down to 801 units with just 81 convertibles. The final year of 1972 added 728 hardtops and 81 convertibles. The Stage 2 never became a production option. Only those 2 factory test cars existed alongside the estimated 75 to 100 sets of parts sold over the counter before cancellation. Recognition for the Buick GS and GSX has finally started building in the collector market, though values still lag behind more famous competitors. Hagerty's 2024 valuations put a concourse quality 1970 GSX with the base engine at approximately $128,000, jumping to $172,000 with the Stage 1 package. $236,500. That's the highest recorded sale for a 1970 GSX Stage 1, according to Classic.com data from January of 2025. Other notable results include $209,000 at Mecum-Kissimmee in January of 2023, $162,000 for a beautiful Apollo White example on Bring a Trailer in July of 2024, and $148,500 for a Saturn Yellow 4-speed at Barrett-Jackson in January of 2017. The Jones and Benesek Stage 2 prototype. The actual factory test car motor trend drove that dominated superstock racing for years, carried an estimate of $175,000 to $200,000 when it appeared at Mecum, Las Vegas in November of 2018. Perspective comes from comparing these prices to equivalent muscle cars. A Concours 1970. Plymouth Hemi Cuda commands $400,000 or more, while a 1970 Chevelle LS6 in top condition runs approximately $217,000. The GSX Stage 1, with superior torque, comparable rarity, and documented superior performance, sells for $172,000. Collectors call it a relative bargain because buying the actual fastest muscle car of 1970 costs less than its less capable competitors. Values have softened recently, with Hagerty data showing approximately 13.7% decline in the 12 months before mid-2024. Average GSX sale prices from 2019 through 2024 landed at $96,988. 50 years after the i2 Stage 2 program ended, the legacy lives on through the people who built it and the handful of cars that survived. Denny Manor, the engineer who led the program, continued attending GS Nationals events for decades. His amazement at the lasting enthusiasm for these cars came through as genuine because he never expected a canceled racing program to generate passion half a century later. Both factory prototypes survive in documented condition. The Jones and Benesek Red GS competed throughout the 1970s and has been verified and authenticated, while the Kenny Bell White GSX won gold at the 2016 Muscle Car and Corvette Nationals with 985 out of 1,000 points. GS National events continue drawing enthusiasts who remember when Buick beat everybody. For a brief window in 1970, 1971, and 1972, the luxury brand from Flint, Michigan produced the most devastating muscle cars in America. The final word on the Buick GS Stage 2 comes down to achievement and tragedy wrapped together. This car beat the legendary Hemi, beat the famous LS6, and beat everything Pontiac and Ford could build while carrying Buick's traditional luxury appointments with air conditioning and power, everything adding weight the competition didn't have to deal with. More than 500 horsepower came out of the Stage 2 in an era when that number seemed impossible. Tony Branson ran 9.17 seconds at 153 miles per hour with experimental tunnel port components, while Dave Benesek went undefeated for an entire season in NHRA Stock Eliminator. Almost nobody knows this story. Brand perception, marketing failures, and the crushing weight of emissions regulations killed the program before it could become legendary. 2 factory Stage 2 cars. Approximately 75 to 100 sets of Stage 2 heads reaching customers before production ended. This might be the rarest factory muscle car package in history. The baddest Buick Detroit ever let loose was also the one that got away. Buick's marketing team never capitalized on it, emissions regulations came at exactly the wrong time, and full production never happened. For the drag racers who lined up against these cars in 1970 and 1971, the answer was clear. Seeing a Buick GS at the starting line meant you were probably going home a loser. Some cars become legends through advertising and hype. The Buick GS Stage 2 became legend the old-fashioned way, by beating everything else on the track. Now you know the story that Detroit almost forgot.